started getting very distracted from what was going on. Sorry, that was very kind of jarring right now. But anyway, so what I asked them using this graphic, and I handed it out to each of them, I said, the only things that you can control are what are in the big oval there, right? Everything about yourself you can control. So how you respond, how you accept what's going on, how you take care of yourself, how you speak, the actions you take, all of those things. The things in the box at the bottom are just a sampling of all those things that you have no control over. And yet we tend to focus on those things. So what I'd ask them to do, and this has been very successful, not even just related to a pandemic, but was to write down all the things that were kind of floating around in their brains. And they would write down, and then to separate that list into things they could control and things they could not. And the science supports, research supports that by having a list of things where you can focus your energy at the end of a day, where you can be very distracted by all of the things that are going on, right? It wasn't even just a pandemic. We had social unrest. We have an economy now that is impacting a lot of our people, gas prices, all of these things, but we can't really control those. But if at the end of the day, we can look back and see that we were productive, it actually was very significant for the team. And it's actually I use this tool every now and then when I feel my brain is a little bit too full, for lack of a better term, to actually break down where I can focus our energy. And so when we give our teams tools to do these things, they're then able to process that as well. There we go. So just to touch on resilience really briefly, and this is something that I think we always need to work on with our teams, regardless of what's going on in the world around us. And this quote here, I've done a lot of research on resilience and have shared a lot of content on that. And there's 3 driving characteristics about resilience. And one of them is a staunch acceptance of reality. A second is a deep belief, often buttressed by strongly held values, that life is meaningful, right? That there is a meaning to what is happening around us, and the uncanny ability to improvise. I love this quote. So if we think of those 3 key things, we might not like reality, and we're going to talk about acceptance in a couple slides. We might not like reality, but it is exactly that. It's the reality of what's happening. And I had originally realized on the importance of this topic actually in November of 2016, the day after the election. And I had some first generation immigrants on my team. They were worried for their patients, our patients, they were worried for their families. And so resilience is it's something that we should focus on for ourselves and our teams pretty consistently. So and the first key to that is taking care of ourselves. And I think when we create a culture where we are not able to focus on separating and giving people time to actually take care of themselves, then that's when the burnout happens. That's when the breakdowns start to happen. And part of that is actually feeling what's going on, right? You can't pretend that it's not happening. You actually have to recognize and sometimes write down the things that it's making you feel. Leaving your comfort zone is something that is known to actually expand your resilience, because it's very easy to stay in our comfort zones, and our comfort zone is not always healthy. Sometimes we stay in our comfort zone because it's what we know. And so the more that you can venture out and develop new skills, and see what you're capable of, and really supporting our teams to do that, I think is really important. And then, as we talked about in the last slide, controlling what you can. And then I'm going to discuss more in this presentation, building connection with other people so that you can share and be part of something, as opposed to the isolation that we've heard a lot about. And I think that isolation exists often. You don't need a pandemic to create isolation. I think there are people that feel that they don't belong, lack of inclusion. All of these topics that everyone is discussing now have existed for quite some time. So the connection piece I find to be incredibly important. So I speak a lot about positivity, and I believe that focusing on the positive things that are going on around us can be very, very challenging. And the reality is, psychologist Rick Hansen explains that our brain is Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. So if you're able to do it yourself and support your team in doing this, where they're able to see that there are still good things going on, and you're actually able to retrain your brain. It's scientifically supported that if you make a focus, and it goes beyond like a gratitude journal, because a gratitude journal, it is things you're grateful for, but some of those things tend to repeat. And there's actually an exercise called the 3 Good Things Challenge, which I'll explain these beautiful trees that are in this slide in just a moment. But the 3 Good Things Challenge, I actually first learned about from a researcher at Duke University. I was at a healthcare symposium and he was presenting on the 3 Good Things Challenge. And what it actually is that for 14 nights, each night before you go to bed, you think of 3 positive experiences that happened that day and what emotion they made you feel. And when in doing so, you actually end the day, right? Because I said, do this at night before you go to bed. You actually end the day focusing on the good things that happened. And it doesn't have to be big. When my team and I did this, just the finance team, in December of 2019. And sometimes it would be things like one of my team members said his wife made him coffee. Right. Like that was a positive experience that day, and it made him feel loved. Right. It can be something at work, a project coming together. It's not about the enormity of the item. It's how the positive emotion that it made you feel. And the science actually supports that if you do this for 14 days, you will continue to feel more positive and be able to scan the environment for good things that are happening 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months after it's occurred. And I actually think that that's why in March of 2020, my team actually very quickly was able to respond and adapt. These trees are from later. We did this at all 9 locations at East Valley. And the team, we talked about it at the staff meeting, and then they would write on these pieces of fruit, positive things that they put on their list, and they would decorate the trees. The trees would bloom, blossom, however you want to look at that. But the great part about it was that it really, not only were they able to focus on what was positive and happening to them, they were able to see what their peers and their colleagues and actually create connection on the good things that were happening. And by the way, those trees, very easy to get on Amazon. And they're actually like school teacher trees, that they would put up on a one-dimensional bulletin board. And I actually really liked doing that project, and it's a very easy project to do. So now we're going to talk a little bit about acceptance. And Michael J. Fox explains that acceptance does not mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. And he also explains that his happiness grows in direct proportion to his acceptance and inverse proportion to his expectations, right? So as we discussed earlier, resilient people have a staunch acceptance of reality. So a lot of people resist reality, right, of what's actually happening. And before we can take action to change it, whether that be something political driving or something, social injustice, any number of things, we have to at least recognize what is. And so by accepting the reality, we're able to make space for it and accept what's uncomfortable. And instead of resisting what's happening around us, we can spend time getting used to feeling uncomfortable. And once you have accepted reality, then you can set the plan for how you're going to move forward. So let's talk about employees a bit. This research is from the Harvard Business Review. Earlier, I want to say it was late 2021. So these all seem very straightforward, and that's actually why I included this quote that says common sense is not common practice. So we think, okay, so these are the things that drive employees and to support them at working at optimal performance. And just to put that in perspective, of the 14,000 people that were included in the study, only 15% were working at optimal performance, and 16% indicated they were using less than 50% of their full potential. Now, there's a lot of reasons that happens, and these were the key indicators that the study revealed drove optimal performance. So the first one is trust, right? Being able to trust that what you're hearing is true. We're going to talk more about communication, and that you're getting clear information that you can actually rely on. So clear expectations, often that is something that we assume people know what their job is supposed to be. I'm actually in conversations about that now. Sometimes, people sign their job description and they move on, and being really clear, even not just regular job duties, but if there's a project, things like that. Clear understanding, this is one of my favorites, of why rules are in place. I have gone to I've been new to organizations various times in my career, and I often hear, well, that's just the way we do that, right? That nobody really knows why they do that. They're just told that's the way we've always done it. Empowering our teams to solve problems on their own and creatively really not just leads to creating connection and being able to fully engage with their peers to solve a problem, but there's a value system that's associated with that as well. So it's an empowering, empowered to solve problems, but it supports how the employee feels that they're viewed. So also recognition for jobs well done. I'm going to talk a little bit about appreciation. I think that's a low-hanging fruit, if you will. Appreciation goes a long way and doesn't take any time, and it's free. And it's often overlooked. And it is actually the number one reason that the Department of Labor still has on record for why people leave jobs is because they don't feel valued in their job. Leadership, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. I have been known to be, I don't know how to explain it, but I'm a very direct and have a loud voice, and was probably less aware at earlier times in my career of the impact that had on other people. And I think we need to know that people view us and the way we behave and the way we speak based on their own lens, right? So, but we always have to be conscious from the C-suite all the way down to the front line, how we talk to each other. And with emotional intelligence and self-awareness, it says leadership, but really we could all stand to have that fortified a little bit, be aware of how we react to things, and also to understand the purpose and meaning of their work. So I had a recent conversation where someone said people should just do their jobs. Why they're doing it is not important. And I would argue the complete opposite, that why people do their jobs actually drives them to do better work. So communication. I use the image in this slide because if you look closely at it, you will see if you assume the CEO or the leader, manager, even of a department is in the middle, you will see that sometimes the direct communication goes out to the other people, and then you will see examples of where it is blocked by people in the process of the communication. And researchers Malett and Ride, who have written quite a bit about communication, they use the illustration of a broadcast, right? So the leader is sending messages, and the receiver towers are actually the employees. And the farther the receiver is from the actual broadcast, the more noise and disruption happens to the message, right? So, and it can even be something as simple as a supervisor or a manager that has distorted the message or entirely blocked the message. My organization now has over 800 employees, and we were at a board retreat recently, and they said the CEO should be talking to every front desk staff. And he said, how do I do that I wouldn't get any work done if I was constantly going to our 29 locations, right, to talk to the front desk staff. but there's a responsibility of everyone in between to take that message so that to share with the teams and to make sure that the exact message is what's actually being passed down. So some of the key things to remember in communication, because quite honestly, communication is one of the most significant drivers of culture in an organization. There's no two ways about that. We really can't get around it. So first of all, that it be transparent, right? And that's, no, every employee doesn't need to know every single thing that's going on in the organization, but there shouldn't be partial sharing. It should be a message that has been decided to be shared that is transparent. And we've been talking a lot about communication recently, but it should be consistent. So if it came from one person, you want to make sure that you're not manipulating the words, or even on accident, right? Not manipulation. We think that's a negative all the time, but it doesn't even have to be with bad intent. But if words are changed because it's easier to say and we think people understand it, it can distort the entire message. Communication should be intentional, and it should be very easy for everyone to understand. You know, clinics are unique because we have a lot of our frontline staff went to trade programs, and then we have terminal degrees in the same organization with PhDs and MDs. And so there's a lot of areas for gap of understanding in between. Another is to remember that communication is a two-way process. It's not just telling people and talking at them. You need to be able to get responses, right? We started recently at our organization a mailbox to the top practice, where people can put anonymous comments or questions or concerns if they feel that they're not being addressed locally in their clinics to the C-suite, and we read those and process those. We also do a regular message that our organization, the acronym is BACH, B-A-C-H, and so it's called BACH Talks. And so we will share highlights and things that we think people should know, and offer for people to respond and give us feedback. Good communication builds trust, which we talked about, and creates connection, and promotes team building. So in inviting, part of what I mentioned before about inviting people to work together to solve problems, they communicate with each other, and it's a what they call a virtuous cycle, right? As it happens, it keeps building on itself and creates more good communication. So as I mentioned, I read a lot, and a great book that I read, very short, very easy to read, is by a man named David M. Dye, and it's called The 7 Things Your Team Needs to Hear You Say. So, and I had them all written on a whiteboard in my office at East Valley, and now I have a slide similar to this one tacked up on my bulletin board in my office. So the first one, you can. And each of our team members, ourselves included, come to work with our own historical baggage, what we think we can, what our abilities are. And part of the job of a leader and an organization is to be the chief belief officer, if you will, and to inspire your team of what they're capable of. And we each have the power. And when I use the word leader, that is not a C-suite, title. That is, you can lead from any seat in the organization, right? So leaders at all levels have the power to elevate the team or to remind each other that you can, we can, and we can do it together. Another is try it. And I'll use the pandemic as an example. More than once, we didn't have all the information, and we'd say, go ahead and try it. Let's see if it works, right? And I say that even today. I don't always have the right answer, but we've got to start somewhere and see where we can get from there. I believe statements connects our values to the team and to our work. It also shares our personal why, if you will, why we do what we do. And sharing with your team builds this connection and improves understanding of where you're coming from. And when we're able to share why we believe that something matters, your team is no longer just doing tasks, they are part of something. Many departments can be far more distanced from the mission. Finance is a perfect example. And the farther we are from the mission, we don't always understand our role. So the I believe statement can be very important. Just as important can be the how can I help? And there are times where I ask, how can I help? And there's nothing I can do. But sometimes it's, if you would talk to this person, or can you help us remove that barrier? Very important to know that you're there to help. I'm sorry are often the hardest words to say, but admitting that we were wrong, as hard as it is, it's incredibly meaningful. And sometimes you may even have to apologize for someone else. And when you combine that with an I believe statement, it actually sends a strong message to team members. And if we make an assumption or jump to a conclusion or make a mistake, just apologize, right? It goes, you'd be surprised how far it goes. There was a recent study done on litigation and in healthcare, actually. And the study showed that litigants would have been, I think it was 40% less likely to sue had someone just said they're sorry that something happened. That won't happen here. Typically comes up or can come up with performance. Being able to clearly state what your expectations are and what will and will not happen or be allowed to happen is very challenging, but it's necessary. And we don't do anyone any favors by being unclear with expectations and what is not acceptable. The more we allow things to happen, it goes against the culture you're trying to create, quite honestly, the positive culture. And then the last is that nice. And this goes back to appreciation of your team, celebrating successes and wins, congratulating your team or team members on their successes is really quite meaningful. And it doesn't have to be huge. And this also comes up in change management. You need to break a task down into small, easy steps so that you can recognize, you can autocorrect if necessary, but you can also recognize the early wins which fortify the team to move forward. So also part of communication is the power of listening. And it's, as Adam Grant explains in this quote, it's not just about giving people the space for their views. It displays respect to the employee, that you're actually willing to listen to what they have to say. And most importantly, it is about giving them our attention. If someone comes into my office and says they have to speak to me, I stop what I'm doing. I don't keep typing. If I'm in the middle of something, I'll say, give me a couple of minutes to finish. But you need to provide the attention, because if someone's coming to talk to you, chances are it was very challenging for them to do so. So mindset. There are two different kinds of mindsets. There's the growth or learner mindset, and then there's the fixed or judger mindset. And I find myself doing this more and more, where when there's a new challenge, if we stopped and said, what are we supposed to learn here? Or how can I be more solution focused and less blame focused, remove the defensiveness and remove the finger pointing. And there's lessons for this really everywhere. And how you, the questions you use with your team, your colleagues, and I actually joke, even my spouse, your spouse, can actually take conversations in a whole new way. So there's two mindsets. The first, as I mentioned, is the learner or growth mindset. And the names just depend on who's writing about them. Believes that learning is constant, can be developed, and sees mistakes as opportunities. Whereas the fixed mindset believes that you're either born with talent or not, and a little less adept at exploring opportunities for learning, and is very defensive and resists feedback. And by cultivating a growth mindset in yourself, as I mentioned, lots of these things, they start with us, opens your team, and in turn can open an entire organization up to new ways, problem solving, and success. And I've even just taken the word problem out of when I ask a question and say, what solutions are we looking for, instead of what problems are we focusing on? It makes a significant difference. And it actually, so there's a couple ways. And if you search this, like the learner mindset, for instance, there's these maps that show people on this path to heading towards judger and how easily you can shift to learner. And it is literally about the questions we ask. So having the questions or sample questions, you can print this slide, you can Google it, however that works. I think I know I've also provided a reading list, which has a couple books on mindset that are available, but focusing on what's working, right? As opposed to what's not. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later as well. But what's the big picture, as opposed to focusing on this minutia? How does it fit into what's really going on? Learning from mistakes. I can't emphasize enough, if you're going to create a culture that can help support a learning culture, a learning organization, people can't be afraid to show mistakes. Mistakes are literally opportunities for learning. And it really impacts how people will be able to come forward in how you actually respond to mistakes. I typically, the way I work with them, unless of course they're repeated mistakes, which then exposes something else. But if it's a mistake and we didn't know we were making it, let's just discuss how we're going to fix it if it needs to be fixed, and how it's not going to happen in the future. Those types of conversations can really help drive more open thinking. So just here's a list. So ask what's working, not what's wrong. Ask what we can learn instead of how will I look bad. Some people, again, don't want to admit that maybe their suggestion was wrong. It's important to remember that there's often more than one right answer. There's just the best right answer at that time, right? So not every answer that's not selected is wrong. Ask what's possible instead of why bother. Solution focused, again, instead of blame focused. It doesn't do any good to blame the person that has come up with the idea that was not best at the time. Look for choices, look for opportunities, take the time to understand what's actually happening. This is I see it even in my current organization. Someone can be sitting in an office in a whole different location, and they're certain they know why someone's making a mistake at a clinic or in another county. And you can't make that's again, making an assumption that we know what's going wrong without investigating it, and to seek to understand others before insisting on being understood. So find ways to invite others to share where they're coming from, share what's important, and why. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, why are you so tied to this idea, right? Why can't we explore this other option? So in pretty much every conversation, every presentation I've done, I always have something about silos. I think silos can be significant barriers in any organizations. And they can also, you might not even think you have silos. You might think you have some high operating team, and really what's happening is there's still a limit to how that team is actually engaging with those on the outside. It makes trust almost almost impossible. And it really promotes exclusion, when we were talking about the very importance of inclusion. And so at my new organization, I was speaking with the CEO, and we were talking about silos. And very quickly he got out, he's very much a visual person. And so he got out his those big white pads, and he drew what I was describing, which is, you could have great functioning organization or departments within your organization, and they're just feeding bi-directional to each other, and kind of all the business is going on around the organization. But what it should really look like is this, which is that and I realize our organizations have more than 3 departments, but there's this overlap. And in the middle is the sweet spot of the organization, where it's really driving the success of free flow of information and progress and innovation, inclusion, getting input from diverse individuals. All of those things are driven by a silo-free environment. And I was asked in a session, well, how do you break down a silo? And my two pieces of input on that are to either share information far and wide, inviting others to do the same, and to speak up. I know from my experience being a finance professional that often we're the last to know, but that's often because we're sitting in our offices and we don't venture out to ask questions about what's going on. So be interested and look for ways to connect with those that are in those other departments. So now we're going to talk about connection, and Brene Brown, who's one of my favorites, connection is the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And that's really the essence of it. And that's the essence of, in my opinion, that healthy culture that you would want to create. And connection is an important part of that. So we need connectors to do that, right? So there's this great book by John C. Maxwell called Everyone Communicates, but Not Everyone Connects, right? So you can just talk at people all you want, but not having the opportunity to actually connect can be very difficult. So a connector, I'll just take it right from the slide, makes it clear for all to understand, right? Your language should not exclude everyone that needs to participate. Find common ground, right? Even in that judge or learner conversation that we were having, fixed growth mindset understanding is we're all on the same team. We're trying to get somewhere to find a solution. So find some way that you can do that. In that, you need to create an experience. It says that everyone enjoys, but that really means there are opportunities for people to find joy in their work. I don't think that's a Pollyanna approach to work. I think, and science supports that actually, if you find 20% of your work brings you joy, that's the measurement, right? That 20%. And more does not significantly impact the individual, but less does significantly impact the individual. So creating a work environment, creating the activities, and distributing the work in a way that people can actually be fulfilled by it. Connectors inspire others to connect, to do things, to drive the organization to success. And regardless of title, they lead by example. Anything I'm talking about today, we can talk about it and you can tell other people to do it. But if you're not doing it yourself, it's like the person, the CEO or the CFO, or it could be anybody that says, no, go home, that's fine. And then is sending you emails till midnight. That's not really sending the same message. Everybody, if you need to walk the walk, not just talk about it. So there are creative ways that we can look at connection. So opportunities for new team members to connect from the start, that can be really difficult. And it was really difficult during the pandemic because everybody wasn't at the same location. And, people were wearing masks and we had to social distance. So even if they were at our location, we were, distancing ourselves from each other, right? So it makes it very hard to really have some of those onboarding discussions that are so important. Cultivate an environment where team members can collaborate and problem solve independently. I have a philosophy that took me some time to develop, quite honestly. But so if point A is here and we need to get to point Z, I really don't care how you get there, as long as it's auditable, efficient, and we can get there. So give me the suggestion. You guys put it together. You're the subject matter experts, is the way I characterize that. So how can we get there? And when you give people more opportunities to do that, they actually feel more part of the bigger picture, that they're solving some key piece. Group recognition and peer-to-peer shout outs is really important. We start our team meetings with these cards you can get. I think you can order on Amazon, different companies. And it's basically, you put the person's name in it and then something great they did. And I would start every staff meeting with that. And everybody, nobody wanted to read their own, so they'd all hand it to me, and I would read, so-and-so thinks you did a great job because of this. And it doesn't have to be huge. I remember when the staff member that organized birthdays was like, we really appreciate so-and-so for organizing all the birthdays. These things matter. And some people need to know that what they're doing matters. And when we cultivate trust and connection through personal interactions, it really helps. And I know there's, that fine line between personal life and business life, but one of what, my team, something as simple as, what movie did you see recently? And we found that people had these commonalities and even surprising things of, who likes the horror films and who likes the Game of Thrones when all of that was going on. So you really get to see where you actually have things in common with each other, or what those things might be. So I mentioned in this last slide, subject matter experts. And I think of this quote often, and big CEOs laugh at this. So try never to be the smartest person in the room. And if you are, invite smarter people or find another room. So the CEO, the CFO, the manager, the director should not have all the answers, right? You have people on the floor. I used to laugh when another director or colleague of mine would call and say, I have a billing question. And I'd say, don't ask me, go directly to the billing staff, ask them and get the information you need. Our subject matter experts are very good at their roles and often undervalued and often underengaged, because we just want them to keep doing that great work that they're doing. But if they feel undervalued and underengaged, then they won't keep doing that work for us. They will go somewhere else to do that work. So asking people for input can be very, very important. I would argue one of the most important in making them feel part of the organization, part of the culture, part of the success of what happens. So I've been speaking a lot about change management, and often what organizations focus on is what is broken. And if you change the conversation to looking for bright spots, it offers the opportunity for people to, again, focusing on the positive, really look at the great things that are happening in their organization and saying, we need to do more of that. And I had an example shortly after I got to my new organization where I had used that I wanted everybody to give a bright spot at the beginning of our leadership meeting. And there was some struggle, like, oh, what's going right? And I said, well, I have a bright spot. And I shared what the bright spot was, that person has since gotten a promotion and is in charge of this thing that she was doing so well, and that she has replicated across 29 locations. Well, had people not been focusing on that, we might not have seen it. So if you think back to that Star Wars reference of your focus determines your reality, if you're constantly focusing on what's broken, you're going to constantly see what's broken and you're not going to see what's working. And we need to survey what's working a bit more in our organizations and applaud that and elevate that. I also think focusing on strengths as opposed to weaknesses is significant. And if all we do is focus on what people are doing wrong and what they're bad at, actually, let me rephrase that. It's not about what they're doing wrong. What they're bad at, the best you're ever going to get is mediocrity. But if you have some candid conversations about what really drives them to do better work, you actually will get a more fulfilled employee that's actually able to focus on what they do well. And I remember when I first started having this conversation, a colleague said, well, what's the opposite of focusing on strengths? And I said, it is literally organizations that focus constantly and sometimes relentlessly on weaknesses and do not applaud what people are doing well and find ways to give them more of that. And I think even if you look at your teams, there's different assessments you can do for strengths. One of them is called Strength Finders by Gallup. And it is can be very instrumental in really exposing what people do well. As an example, I hate talking on the phone. I hate phone conversations. Zoom's not so bad, but I really don't like phone conversations for a number of reasons. So if phone calls need to be made, I tend to trade some other task to let somebody else talk on the phone. It's just, if somebody needs to do a bunch of calling, it's typically, I try not to make it me. In another example, we had my previous organization, we had a customer service representative, so front desk, that people would always say, she's so slow, she doesn't do this well, she's so slow, check-ins take forever. But the flip side of that was, what does she do well? I happened to be at a clinic, and people would say how great she was as a trainer. So if you have that person that is so into the details, shouldn't that be the person that you have training the people that might be faster and might do a better job, right? So how can you look at that to elevate those team members? So this is just a kind of an appreciation initiative that we did at East Valley. And basically, it's not dissimilar from what I post on LinkedIn, where basically a graphic, you notice the logos up there with some of our hashtags. And these would be sent out on Monday for motivation, Wednesday for wisdom, and Friday for, typically it was something that had to do with their self-care and taking care of themselves. And it would be an email that was sent from the leadership team, not from one person. And we got some really fabulous feedback on that when that was done. And the thing I'll say about appreciation, first of all, it needs to be timely and needs to be relevant. Waiting for a review period or a massive project to be complete might not be the right time. So find ways that you can work it in the process, and being authentic in it. You know, just walking up and saying, oh yeah, thank you, and turning around and walking away, not as effective. And yeah, and not wavering on it. It can be, it doesn't have to be a formal program. As I mentioned, there are ways to integrate it into your work. So this is just I have done a few presentations on the employee experience. And what I want to start with is, there is a rule of congruent experience. And that rule states that a positive employee experience, it has an equal impact on the customer experience. This is research and science supported. They are related. So we can send an unhappy, unengaged, unfulfilled employee to customer service trainings all we want, and they will not have the same, it will not have the impact that you're looking for. Instead of focusing on how can I make people more fulfilled at work, therefore they do better in customer service. In the big corporation world, they'll say that if you want to impress the stakeholder, you need, or please the stakeholder, you need to start with the employee. So the benefits of a positive employee experience are all of these here, right? It's a more positive work environment. People feel they belong. They're happier at work. And you can be happy at work and totally knee deep in so much work that you have to get done. One does not negate the other. I'm actually almost more fulfilled at work when I have a million things going on than when there's not enough. And so also here on this slide are some actions you can take for a positive employee experience right away. Make sure you're sharing the values of your organization consistently across the entire organization. And as I've mentioned, find ways for employees to connect. There's lots of different opportunities to do that. Link meaning and contribution to the goals that you're laying out for the organization. And use performance as a continuous conversation, not something that just happens once a year where you're unable to reference what could have impacted the organization. So really briefly, I know I'm running up on time here, are some tips to create a learning organization. I actually think when employees, and it's supported that when employees learn together, they actually do better together. But the key, and they're more successful. And the key things to remember are about psychologically safe space. So people need to be able to ask questions, even if they seem stupid, right? we'll say that there's no stupid questions. And then inevitably there is a time where someone asks a question, you're like, okay, right. But it's expanding other people's learning is important, and they need to have the safe space. And you really learn actually where a gap in training is when a question comes out of left field that you thought, wow, you didn't learn that in onboarding, or you didn't learn that in your one-on-one training, right? Lean into disagreements. This goes into that finding common ground. Find ways that you can understand why you're disagreeing, right? Is it just because someone wants to be right, therefore someone has to be wrong? What is the purpose of it? And then again, acknowledge common ground. Don't be afraid to be wrong. We're all wrong at some time or another, and the sooner we recognize that, the better. View mistakes as opportunities. I hate the word failure. And remember that failure is not a description of a person. It is an activity that has happened. So people should not be described as failures, ourselves or anyone else for that matter. And from finance, it's funny to say this, but rethink best practices periodically, because in the future you might find that things change. And then this last one, assume positive intent. That's actually a quote from Indra Nooyi, who was the first big corporate CEO, and she was the CEO of Pepsi. And she got a lot of interesting comments made to her. And she made the statement that she would assume positive intent, assume they were coming from a good place, but just then that kept her mind open and she could find better ways to respond and solve the problems. And the purpose of learning, remember as well, is not to affirm our beliefs, it's to evolve our beliefs. So we shouldn't be done, our team shouldn't be done learning. It is something that we should all do together. And then these are some tips to create a peer learning culture. I've also included some additional slides which have some steps. The importance of it are exponential, right? Because no one person should have all of the information. And it's a burden sometimes to do so. It also can, initially employees can feel somewhat alarmed by having to share their information because they think their information makes them important to the organization, but it shouldn't be the information they're holding. It should be the important work that they do for the organization. So that's important to actually share to your teams, either your local teams, the organization as a whole. And just some takeaways and tips: take care of yourself, find ways to create connection, be sensitive to what our teams need or are asking for, transparency, think of your mindset. So the next time something comes up, think of the questions you're going to ask, try and eliminate those silos, understand the value of staff from the very front line. I hate using things like the lowest level, but the one that from the ground to the C-suite, just make sure that that value, patient facing or not, is there. And then advertise those successes that happen and do express appreciation. It really costs you absolutely nothing. And so I did mention earlier that I went back for a master's program, and I went to the Drucker School of Management at CGU. And Peter Drucker, who is referred to as the father of modern management, would say to his clients, who would say, thank you, you did all this great stuff for our corporation. And he was doing it back in the 40s with companies like GM. And he'd say, I don't really want to hear thank you. I'd like to hear what you're going to do differently on Monday. So you don't have to tell me, but consider what you'll do differently on Monday and how that can impact your teams. And here's my contact information. I share content really quite regularly on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I am happy for you to use me as a resource. I live and breathe. I love this stuff. It's not really my CFO job, but it is part of, I think, every leader's work, and I think it's really important. So thank you for having me.
Cheryl, thank you so much for all of the great tips on expanding, our interpersonal skills and working on making teams better within clinics. So I appreciate you sharing all of your great content today. I'll open it up for questions if folks want to unmute themselves, or also you can type your questions in the chat. Feel free, or even comments, positive feedback for Cheryl as well regarding the presentation.
I'm reading all of Gerald's great comments to me. So thank you, Gerald. And yes, there's actually like 5 books by Don Miguel Ruiz, and they go deep. But I just start I stop at the 4 for this purpose. So yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of nice comments. Thank you very much. And I really do encourage you to use me as a reference. I mean, a resource. I love this stuff, and I could talk about this stuff for days. But does anybody have any questions? Or did I cover it all?
Yes. Hi, this is Jose Luis from Norris Valley. You provide a lot of information that brings me from what we call the learning organizations to quality management to the pipeline when you organize the workforce to become a better performance group.
Mm-hmm.
So what you think from all these elements that you present, all these ideas that you present, is coming for the new generation of management? So we're talking about people who now is going to be working from home, telecommuting. We're talking about guidelines in the future for people not being in the office. People using Zoom for communication. How do you feel it's going to look the future 1 year, 2 years about communications and integration of the people to collaborate together when they are not physically really on site? So what do you think about that?
Well, I am going to start that by saying if I could predict what's going to happen with workforce, I'd be a lot more wealthy than I am now. And if I could fix all the wrongs in workforce, that would just be a whole other business line, which I would love to do. But I do want to say this. So part of the reason we ran that initiative with those slides that I showed you where we sent it out regularly is because a lot of people were at home, right? So, and it ensured that a message was sent to those in-house and out-of-house, so that it didn't matter if you were working at home. And we actually ended up getting some responses saying, I feel so included, thank you. When we did that tree initiative, right, the 3 Good Things challenge, for those working at home, we had a champion at each clinic where they would send their thing and they would be on the same tree and we'd share pictures. Now, I know those are isolated initiatives. However, I think people are forgetting a very simple thing, and that is it doesn't matter where you're sitting, that engagement needs to go everywhere. And I have 29 locations now in my organization. I know Northeast Valley has many locations. It doesn't matter where you're sitting, the message needs to be the same, right? So whether you're working at home or working at a clinic and you never see your boss, hearing those messages and hearing what's going on in the organization are very, very important. I can't express that enough. And a lot of, I was reading an article recently that said, by the time you're getting tired of your message is only then when it's starting to land, right? So repetition is important, right? Repeating your message over and over again. But that also means consistently across all individuals. And I also think that speaks to those middle barriers, Jose, where, you want to make sure that the message is getting to everyone. I don't think there's any easy answer to how to ensure that it happens well in the future. Some organizations have done this really, really well. And some organizations have failed at it. And I think in the way you engage your employees, regardless of where they're sitting, speaks to that, and how you communicate with your employees. There are lots of options for engagement. And thank you, Lisa, for your comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does that help, Jose? Good.
Yes, thank you so much.
Right. Any other questions for Cheryl? That was a great question.
I'm sorry, let me turn my comment. This is Alexa from Savant Community Clinic. Part of, I think, the difficulty that I have in facilitating is sort of honing in or ranging in those really big ideas. We love hearing ideas from staff, but there are some things that, because of budgets, because of our capacity, it's a little too far outside of the box. And so how do we sort of share that message of, unfortunately, we can't do that without having the staff feel like, well, you never listen to our ideas anyway.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because, so just after getting to my new organization, we wrote a very large budget, $150 million budget, and we have a lot of things in there, a lot of plans, but the productivity hasn't quite been where it was, right? So it's really hard to send that message of, we really need this to drive this, right? I got a request yesterday for all of these construction changes someone would like to their dental clinic, as an example. And I said, as soon as cash flow changes or we are able to secure funding, we will be able to dig into that deeper. So I think recognizing that it's a good suggestion, if it's a good suggestion, it's a good suggestion, but it's amazing the questions you get, right? And things that people want. And they can be oddly specific and really, and you think to yourself, wow, how could we ever roll that out? But what it also reveals is how disconnected from reality that employee probably is. So then that can speak to an education and a communication that needs to happen, right? Like, we need to make sure everybody understands, like you don't tell people if, like, sharing financially where you are can be very challenging, right? But you have to share enough so that they're not coming at you with requests that are just, I mean, out of the park, right? But I do think it often reveals a disconnect that maybe you did not know was there. Like, oh, do they know what it's like to work for an FQHC post-COVID? Right? Where patients aren't coming back in the clinics yet. Maybe they don't understand that part. But I think that's important. And it's also important when you have grant staff that think they're in their own island because their money's coming from somewhere else and their salary's being paid somewhere else and they think they should get different things, that we're all on the same team, right? Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I think the education piece is the biggest thing that, like,
yeah, good.
That disconnect. Thank you so much.
Anything else? Okay.
All right. Well, Cheryl also shared her information. You can connect with her. Those slides will be provided, uploaded in Chatter as always, and I will send a link through the email as well. So if you want to connect with her on anything else that was covered, feel free to do that. So I'm going to share my screen, just kind of some feedback in thinking about as we're getting closer to the end of this series of trainings is, have you thought about what interventions, or have you chosen the interventions that you'd like to work on, right? Are they related to work culture? So I want to go back to, scan the Mentimeter, or you can go to menti.com and put in that code. And I want to see a little bit of where folks are choosing to put their resources and time in developing some of these interventions at their clinics. So I'll give you about a minute on that, and then we'll come back and have kind of a group discussion.
Andres, I'm going to let you all have your conversation and head to my office. I'm sure they'll like to have me back there. And thank you very much for having me. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. All right.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, let's check out some of the results here and see where folks are at in terms of working on these interventions. All right, looks like job demands, workflow, and HIT. It's kind of almost, all right, looks like engage in supportive leadership. It's like a big percentage of folks on working on that. Job demands, productivity, team cohesion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay. All right, awesome. This is great. And then thank you all for sharing those answers out. And we're going to get into kind of a group discussion. We're not going to do breakouts just for the sake of time. I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover everything. But just a couple of questions. What does your work culture look like now, and how can it be improved? And then what intervention are you planning to implement? Is it related to improving work culture, right? Or it's a combination of different things? And we kind of saw there's a little bit of a focus, a little bit placed on the engaged and supportive leadership. So kind of, I guess, maybe a combination of things, but I'd like to hear from you first. Would anybody like to comment about what your culture looks like now, maybe things that you feel might need to be improved, and what intervention are you planning to implement? And I can leave it open for folks to open their mics, or you can share in the chat as well. All right, looks like we have some stuff coming in the chat. Maybe. All right, so I'll ask a follow-up question. Actually, I wanted to, regarding the coaching sessions, I wanted to ask if Deb can talk a little bit about some of their experience at Eastside in terms of what it's been like working with the coaches at Expert Effect, and just kind of sharing a little bit of that process if possible, and anything that might be relevant. We want to make sure that everybody takes advantage of those coaching sessions. So Deb, I hope you're still here.
I'm here.
Awesome. If you can share a little bit about that experience. Thank you.
Sure. So let me just answer your first question about the work culture. We have been practicing what Cheryl was talking about for about 22 years now. It's just part of who we are and what we do. And COVID and some personal issues with my health have caused us to actually become a little bit stronger in certain areas, especially around the communications era. So that was really important. But the interventions we decided to work on was the very first one, which the majority of people, look like 55%, were interested in, and that's engaging in supportive leadership. We have had what we call a care and commitment program for about 20 years now. And we do a lot of recognition. We really, our people are our most important asset. That's who we are. That's in many ways. So we really worked on that whole issue of building teams and recognizing those teams. And in working with our coach, we realized that there were some areas that we could focus on a little bit better from the very start of what we do. So we're actually starting with our job announcements. How do we get across that culture in our job announcement so that we can attract the people that we would like to have work with us and be part of our team? And then how do we keep them on board, and how do we keep the people that we have? So we have a whole recognition program that has like team member of the month, team member of the quarter, of the year. We recognize service areas. We actually do gift cards for service year anniversaries. The length of service, we have birthdays, we have spot recognition where any manager or any staff person can pick up a little card and write a message to their colleague and tell them that they're appreciated and why. And just really, we also do a recognition survey early on when they're during their onboarding, because not everyone likes to be recognized publicly. Some people like to be, it's more personal, and they just like that one-on-one. And then, well, how do they like to be recognized? Some people might want a bag of chips, and some people may want a Starbucks gift card, whatever it is. How do people like to be recognized? So we have worked on that, but we really could do some further work, I think, on the team input. We do have what we call the fish ideas, fresh ideas start here, where anyone can put in an idea and we read them once a month and we decide on them once a month, what we can do and what we can't do. Very similar to what we're talking about there at the end. You know, everybody wants a raise every month. Well, that's not going to happen in the community health center world, but how can we address those issues, and what is the education that we can do around those issues? We have a active participation by our team members across the board. You know, we have a broad range of people involved in risk management and quality assurance, so we really value their input there. But we also have what we call a celebrations committee, and every month we have celebrations. Like just yesterday, we handed out bags of popcorn and popcorn containers because it's customer service week. And we wanted to recognize the customer service that our team has with our patients and with each other. And so just kind of little things like that that really make a big difference and make the office smell really good when everybody popped those microwave bags of popcorn and no one burnt any. And then we do an annual team assessment, and we actually respond to the answers on those team assessments. At a monthly team meeting, we actually talk about those and what we could do better and what, but we can always do better. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. No matter what you do, you can always do better, because as you hire more people and the people change, the dialogue changes, and you have to recognize that. And then how do we do better, and how do we address the needs that people have? We can't be all things to all people, but we can find that common ground and be those things to people. And then the big thing we're working on with Ben is our stay interviews. You know, those kind of got ended because of COVID. And so we want to start those back up again. So especially since we've been really successful in hiring people. In the last 2 years, we've gone from 51 employees to 82 employees. So with those stay interviews become really important, of course. So I guess and we're working on an intranet. That's one of the ways we want to connect, is we want to have internal communications. Right now I I used to write a daily blog. Now I write a weekly one for the whole team, but I think an intranet would make it a lot easier to do. So that's how we communicate, and that's how we recognize. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think one of the things that I heard is that there are things that you were already doing, but that there's also room for improvement, and meeting with the coaches, just identifying areas that could be expanded or improved in many ways. So, you know, again, you know, make sure that you're following up on these. You know, this is all a time and investment that you're putting back into your teams. So, you know, make sure that you reach out to them to schedule those. I also saw a couple of other items on the chat. Yadida wrote intervention. We are planning to implement is diversity, so equity, diversity, and inclusion. We are diverse, however, it's not fully implemented. So, you know, it looks like you already have an idea of things that you want to improve. And Alexa wrote, we are interested in and discuss staff communication and cohesion to ensure that staff stress is reduced when changes happen in the workflows that impact multiple departments in multiple ways. Definitely, right? So, you know, as Deb shared, you know, there's always room for improving the things that are already said. So thank you for sharing. Would anybody else like to share any feedback, either if you've received coaching sessions or maybe just sharing some of the answers to these questions, or, you know, if you haven't decided on an intervention yet, what is the challenge around that, and if there's anything that we can do to support?
Andres, can I just say one more thing?
Absolutely.
About the communications part? I think that's where we started the daily messages from Deb when COVID hit, because I got kicked out of the office because of my health. And so how did I communicate with the team as we moved and COVID hit at the same time? And we kept them up, and I do them weekly now. And that's how we communicate. Yeah. So that if we're making changes on workflow or we hear of an issue that's come up, and that's really helpful, because then we discuss those things in our morning huddles. And it's very, very helpful to just nip anything in the bud that's going to happen and allow people to answer questions really early on. So
Definitely.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, so for the sake of time, again, I always invite you all to continue these conversations in your teams as you think about these interventions, schedule those coaching sessions to get more feedback on the things that are working, things that might need to be expanded or improved. Aisha launched the poll. While you all are doing the poll, we are doing another giveaway for folks that attended today's training. So I'm gonna hand it over to Aisha to tell us who won the the giveaway for today.
All right, let me get my screen up. Okay, we're going to spin to see who will be winning today's raffle. Okay, so Daisy, are you still here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you just won. We'll be in contact with you after. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. And if you have not already, please fill out the poll. We so appreciate your participation and hope to see you next week. And we'll probably have another raffle. So come next week and find out.
All right, thank you, everybody. Please fill out that poll before you head out. Have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend. Take care. Hello.